So because making maps involves a lot of different terminology and different types of data, I'm going to try to use these different words more intentionally so that we all know what I'm talking about when I say certain things. So when I say data model, what I mean are the kind of very general categories that we put data into. There's the raster data model, which values are stored per pixel. There's the vector data model, in which the kind of geographies are stored in vertices or points. And then I also put table as a data model because the vector data model uses tables, but there are lots of different types of tables. So these are the kind of general data models that we work with. There are lots of others, but that's what we're working with. Each of these models has lots of formats, and the formats are how the computer reads that particular file. So a file might be in the raster data model, but it could be a Jpeg or a TIFF or a PNG. Same with vector. It could be a shapefile, a KML, or an SVG. And if you work with tables, it could be an Excel file, a CSV. It could even be a text file, a TXT, or a DBF. And really quick, I'll just tell you that the JPEG, this is a high compression format, so it makes files smaller. A lot of photographers use this. The TIFF is in general an uncompressed format, very reliable and kind of sturdy, and it won't. Sometimes JPEGs can, we use these when we georeference, but they can make pictures a little more garbled. The TIFF is much larger file size usually, but almost all of QGIS's geographic files are TIFFs. There are hundreds of types, formats, I should say, hundreds of formats for the raster data model, but keep the TIFF in your brain as the one that really matters. Vector, the shapefile, this is the most common one. QGIS uses this. ArcGIS uses this. It was created by the people who created Arc, Esri. They made the shapefile and they released it to the world, and now it's the world standard for vector data, pretty much. KML, this is what Google Earth uses for if you wanted to trace something on Google Earth. It makes a KML. It's called Keyhole Markup Language. Tables, you might work with Excel, which you could save an Excel workbook or this or that. If you want to bring tabular data into Q, you should save it as a CSV, which means comma separated value. And we'll talk more about that when that happens. But also a .txt works if it's tab or comma delimited. The .dbf, this is the table that is actually part of the shapefile. The .shp stores the geometries, and the .dbf stores the attributes. Okay. I'm going to go easy now on the format. That was a lot of information, so don't get bent out of shape. Just remember TIFF, and remember shape, and remember DBF, and that should be pretty good for now. All right, data type. What I mean by this is, are we talking about if there's a number or a value? Are we talking about a real number? Does it have a decimal? Are we talking about an integer number? Or are we talking about text? So we might store a number as a text if, for instance, say it's a zip code, right? A zip code 04553 is the name of the zip code for Newcastle. 04553 is not a quantity; it's a name. So how that number is actually stored on the computer would be stored as a text instead of as an integer. Because if 04553 was stored as an integer, then it would get rid of the 0 out front because that doesn't mean anything if it's a number. Data depth we're not going to worry too much about yet. This is kind of how much space your data is taking up kind of per unit. So if you can just imagine over here on this image, if we had a bunch of zeros and ones here, and every pixel was kind of a bin. In this bin, it can only hold 2 values, and this bin can hold 255 values, and so on. Each of those bins, kind of in each of these pixels, would make this a larger file or a smaller file. And you want to choose the proper bin per pixel. But we won't deal with that for a while. So if I ever say data depth, I just mean how much space am I allowing per kind of unit. So might have just confused it a little more, but this is a valuable terminology. Model is the general category of the data. Format is how the computer recognizes the specific file. And type of data means, is it real, integer, Boolean, or text? And depth means how much space am I allowing for that data to be stored. So I hope that made some sense. If not, feel free to ask me about it. Okay, and lastly, I want to talk about what kind of data or attribute. And, Data Science 101, people would usually talk about this as categorical data versus numerical. I kind of want to talk about it more like qualitative versus quantitative, which means the same thing. But I don't like the word numerical because in GIS, at least, a lot of times we use numbers kind of as names or as qualities rather than quantities. So I'm going to just use kind of exclusively the words qualitative and quantitative, and I break them down into kind of further categories so that if I use those words, you know what I mean. Every person who quote unquote teaches it has their own flavor of how to describe it, but this is mine. So qualitative I further break down into nominal data and ordinal data. And instead of saying categorical, I like to say nominal and ordinal because nominal is kind of the general categorical, what you would assume is names of things. For instance, the name of a road or even the name of a specific type of classification. There's no particular association in terms of quantity or any kind of hierarchy between each of these categories. So forest and water, they're different. They're not things that are on any type of scale with each other. So nominal is a name. Ordinal means it's still kind of a human-imposed order, but usually there's an inherent kind of structuring of the name. So, for instance, a highway system or even a road network system might have street level, local roads, county roads, state roads, and then interstate or national roads. Now that's an order that we're putting it into kind of this is one thing and then it goes higher and higher and higher. Suitability might be another thing. Most endangered habitat versus least endangered habitat. It's nominal or qualitative, but there's actually an order to it. And what's tricky is that we could use numbers, right? We could say 10 is most endangered and 0 is least endangered, and 5 might be half as endangered as 10, but twice as endangered as 2.5. But I just wanted to be kind of clear that these are both qualities, they're kind of qualitative things. Quantitative is a little different. So with quantitative, there's three main categories that I'd like to talk about with that, and that's, we've got count data, ratio data, and interval data. Count is the easiest to probably understand. It's just a raw quantity of something. For instance, number of miles or population per count or population in each county. In our world, we add and subtract these, and it's not too hard to do basic arithmetic with count data. Ratio data means that we've got a percentage or something divided by something else. So that would be miles per hour or percent of a certain population. Interval is a little tricky. It seems like ratio, and it's very similar, and some people would even argue that they're kind of the same thing. But I'd say it's important to distinguish between them because interval means that the number relates to a scale, an inherent scale. And you might say, well, miles per hour is a scale. And it is, but 0 kind of means nothing. Like it's not, you're not moving at all, right? And percent of the age over 60, well, or any kind of percentage, 0 means, again, nothing. Whereas 0 on an interval scale doesn't always mean nothing. So 0 feet of elevation would mean, from sea level, let's see, 0 feet of elevation would mean at sea level. But if you measured from low tide, then 0 might mean something else. And it doesn't mean nothing. It kind of is a location on a scale. For instance, 0 degrees Celsius is 32 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale. So I think it's important to distinguish the difference between interval and ratio, because 0 means something different in this number system than it does in kind of the ratio way of recording data. And 0 in the count, whereas you could have 0 miles per hour and even negative miles per hour. You're never going to have negative people usually. Like count data is usually positive, and it's usually 0 actually means nothing. There is like nothing there. So we can all kind of argue about this on the comments page for the on the YouTube, but feel free to suggest your own way of breaking it up. But if I talk to you about, this raster is quantitative interval data, and then you might guess, okay, well, it's probably elevation, or it's percent grade or something like that, and we'll already have a better way of talking about it together. So I hope this makes some sense. Feel free to contact me if you need clarification.